Okay, let's talk about the songs. Joining us, music journalist and author of Dolly Parton, The Stories Behind the Songs, Annie Zaleski. Annie, thanks for being with us, especially
Absolutely.
on this sad day when it's so important to have people who know as much as possible about Dolly. Let's talk about the songs. The most famous one, perhaps, is Jolene. What's the story behind that one?
You know, Jolene, it's two-pronged. So Dolly at one point met a little fan. Her name was Jolene, and she just kind of liked the name. But as the story goes as well, her late husband, Carl, would go to the bank, and there was a bank teller there, and, who's redheaded. And so Dolly kind of concocted this really, story about a little bit of revenge and kind of imagining, this mythical Jolene who might have been taking her man and saying, no, you're not going to do that. And of course, obviously, that song, it just becomes such an iconic song and such an avatar for, revenge and love and obsession and things like that. And it's a perfect song.
What about I Will Always Love You?
She wrote that when, she got her start in her career collaborating with Porter Wagoner and, on his TV show. And that's what really made her. And at a certain point in the 70s, she decided, I need to go out on my own. And she wrote this song for him. She wrote this song because, kind of letting him know, obviously, everything has meant so much to me. I kind of need to just step out and spread my wings per se and do this. And she wrote it for him. And, again, such an amazing song. And obviously Whitney Houston did that incredible cover of it, which Dolly loved. There was no competition there. Dolly was like, this is an amazing sort of transformation. But yeah, she wrote that around the same time. And I think that's what's so striking about it. She was such a prolific songwriter in the late 60s, early 70s. All of these songs were just pouring out of her.
We talked a little bit about Coat of Many Colors earlier. When she was asked what her favorite song was, she said it was this one, and it was about her childhood. Explain.
Yeah, she literally had this kind of, she's told kind of different stories about this over the years. But she basically had this actual coat of many colors, basically. Her mom made her this jacket, and obviously, as we talked about, Dolly did not have a lot of money. And so she made this jacket with love, with rags of many different colors. And as the story goes, her mom also told her the Bible story featuring Joseph in his own colorful coat. And, she was obviously very proud of it. And she ended up going to school, and her classmates teased her about it because she was poor and, wasn't maybe as fancy as other things. And so she's talking about this, and she's, using this as first off as kind of a loving story about the, importance of, it doesn't matter how you make something, it's the love you pour into it. But it's also just remembering where she came from and just really, just remembering that. And then also, she in the song, she didn't dwell on the teasing. Let's put it that way. So it's a song of resilience as well.
When we were talking about I Will Always Love You and Porter Wagoner, I wonder how much of that laid the foundation, her ability to tell a story about a relationship, breaking free from it, being honest about that. How much of that laid the foundation for the artists that are so famous and so successful today? I'm thinking specifically of Taylor Swift.
Absolutely. When Dolly was coming up, obviously, there weren't that many, country women who were artists writing their own songs. So even on that level, she absolutely paved the way for Taylor Swift. But Dolly was also very, very honest. The things she was writing about, especially early on, they were stories. They were very rich, literary-like stories. And you absolutely see that in Taylor Swift as well. But especially with the relationships, Dolly was very honest and she was very vulnerable about things. And that's what made her music so resonant. But, that was really inspirational for artists that came after her. She made it okay to be talking about, relationships that weren't perfect, to talk about, hardships and being an underdog. There's so many themes in her music that we see with modern artists.
So much feminism as well, even if she might not have called herself a feminist. Just Because I'm a Woman was the title of her second album, released about a woman who was admonished by her boyfriend for passing judgment on past sexual interactions, even though he had done the same.
Absolutely. And, in the time she was making that too, very revolutionary. Those were not things that were really being talked about. You think about, I think of like Loretta Lynn's The Pill, which was also something, she was also talking about themes that were very, very revolutionary at the time. Dolly was really tapping into, a little bit of the kind of the feminist movement and kind of the feminist revolution in her own way, and in a very, kind of honest, vulnerable, literary sort of way, but in a way that was relatable. All of her songs, you could relate to them no matter where you were in your life, I think.
The ownership that she had over her music, how much of that was in reaction to Wagoner?
It's interesting. I'm not sure how much she specifically talked about it, but I can absolutely see that that is a reaction to it, because, she, by the end of, obviously, he was so integral to her career taking off. But, by the end, she was really sort of like, I want to do my own thing. She was really feeling called to be on her own and to do her own music. You could kind of see that after they split off, they did a little bit more music together, but, it wasn't necessarily like reunions like you might see now with people do that. And I think she really was trying to carve out her own path, not Dolly Parton and somebody, but just Dolly Parton on her own. And you absolutely see that, I think, in the way she's really operated throughout her entire career and throughout the rest of her career, honestly.
I mean, a trailblazer in so many ways. I mean, what she wrote about, how she wrote, the way that she looked, but also becoming independent during that time, getting ownership. How was she able to do that when so few were taking women seriously?
I think it's part of the way she carried herself. Obviously she had such determination to become a success. The whole story goes, she graduated from high school and went right to Nashville. She just, and obviously her family growing up, she had really prepared herself to become a musical star, but she just believed in herself so much and carried herself in a way. But she's also a very, very savvy businesswoman, as we've kind of seen in all of the different things she's done over the years, whether it's her cooking line, or her truck stop that just opened, which is incredible. Obviously Dollywood, she really knew that being creative was part of the equation, but also being really smart about your business and your songs and your art, was also part of that. And that's how you really become and stay a success.
What about 9 to 5 and the frustrations of the working woman in the 1980s?
Absolutely. I think that movie and that song captured such a zeitgeist where, it was kind of, women were in the workplace and, but still kind of dealing with that residual sexism of, the 60s and 70s. And, she really tapped into, it's like, oh, you're going to work, you may be a little bit harried. What a way to make a living, right? Working 9 to 5. But in the movie, she and her co-stars get their revenge. And I think that also really taps into something, so many of us when we're at work or dealing with people, like you wish you could kind of do those things, and they sort of acted that out. And, and it's also such a great song. That's the whole thing, is that so many of her messages and her themes were cloaked in music that's memorable. And it's, you can talk 9 to 5 today, and, that is in our cultural lexicon, the lyrics and kind of the themes of that song.
You say 9 to 5 and the song immediately comes into your head. There are a few songs like that. I used to live in London. I'd pass the subway station Waterloo, and Waterloo would come in my head. 9 to 5, the ABBA song. 9 to 5 is the same. Apparently she used her acrylic nails. She would click them together, and she said it sounded like a typewriter as she was writing that song. Annie Zaleski, thank you so much. Again, you have a new book out, Dolly Parton, The Stories Behind the Songs. Which is, I think, I guess, good timing in the sense that people are going to want to learn a whole lot more, and you have the book about it.